Hey guys, welcome to another episode of Brain Cancer Diaries. This episode features a woman from the New York City area named Marissa York, who, spoiler alert, actually had a benign tumor removed, but that doesn't mean her journey's been any easier. But I'll leave the rest to you to see kind of what her journey's been like, from pretty miserable to pretty inspiring.
But I look back and I had this one otolaryngologist that I had been going to for a totally different reason, like an ENT, and I had been going to that doctor pretty regularly, and so I said to him, I have this eyelid twitch, and it keeps like kind of twitching, and he'd say it's probably nothing, stress, caffeine, fatigue. Do you have any of those things? I'm like, oh my God, that's my whole life: stress, caffeine, fatigue. So I said, okay. And then 3 months later, I was going back to him for a follow-up, and I said, I know I sound, and this is what I mean by a woman and apologetically in my situation in a bad marriage, I put up with a lot that I really shouldn't. So I was always saying things like, I'm sorry, I don't mean to complain, but this is kind of bothering me. And, almost like it was something that I was really unsure, I didn't really want to speak up about. But this particular doctor never minimized my, concerns, or never, I said, I know I sound like a hypochondriac, but I've been paying attention, and this eyelid twitch has been going on for 6 months now, almost every day. I don't know if this is normal. And he was like, it could be normal. It could, but he said, since you're bringing it up to me, and he's like, we'll take it seriously. And he said, I'm going to write you a prescription for an MRI. And, he's like, in very, rare cases, it's a brain tumor or something. And then we laughed. I was like, oh, God forbid, we kind of laughed it off. And he's like, I'm going to send you to a neuro-ophthalmologist for some other evaluation. And so I then waited 2 or 3 months to even call this neuro-ophthalmologist, because I thought, oh, I'm just complaining. It's probably nothing. And I just didn't, for some reason, even have the self-confidence to go to a doctor's appointment. I thought I would be brushed off as, this is, now back to my personal situation, and I don't want to jump
Hold
around.
on one second. One point I just want to hit before you get any further.
Yeah.
I mean, it's great that you had a doctor who took you seriously, because that's very important. Could I actually, my journey on this all started with an ENT and otolaryngologist.
I love saying that word.
You pronounced it much better than I did. He told me he thought that I had allergies.
Sinuses, they tell you. Yep.
Yeah, possibly Meniere's, but they did some tests and ruled that out. Some other things, and then vestibular migraines was another thing too.
Yeah.
But he didn't take me seriously. I mean, because at the time my wife and I were joking about how, like, oh, I might have brain cancer, you better be nice to me. Ha 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 ha.
Well, yeah, and it's really weird when you look back, and so if you're a reflective person like I am, I often look back at those situations. I, unfortunately, like you, didn't have a supportive spouse who would banter with me and hear my concerns. I had somebody that was feeding into my insecurities and my emotional weakness at the time, and said things like, and now I was also a stay-at-home mother at the time, and I wasn't working full-time, and it was a lot. I would hear feedback like, you have nothing else to do except go to all these stupid doctor's appointments. You're a hypochondriac. You're making things up. And so that's why I think when I would go to these appointments, I would apologize. I would say, I'm sure it's probably nothing. I'm sorry for even taking your time. I mean, and so ultimately, it was just something that built as anxiety within myself. And it was like, oh, you're just looking for an excuse to not get a job, and this is just consuming you. And it was being thrown in my face. Well, eventually I go back to this neuro-ophthalmologist, and he says, okay, I see the radiologist report. He says, you have a small brain tumor on the left side of your brain. And
by the way.
And I was like, excuse me, can you repeat that? And he goes, well, it's a brain tumor. And he said, but the good news about that, and this all just was coming at me so fast, that it's probably benign. He said, I want you to follow up with my office in 6 to 9 months, and I'll see you then. And I said, that's it? And he said, yeah. And I thought, oh my God. So I was volunteering at my son's high school that morning. I drove over there. I proceeded to do what I needed to do, and I thought, what on earth, what should I do? So I called my now ex-husband, and I said, well, I was just told that I have a brain tumor. And he was like, I can't talk right now, I'm really busy, or something to that effect. And I was like, oh my God. And then I told one of my friends, and then gradually I was like, so I went through this process of thinking, is this really a brain tumor? What else is it? And I proceeded to get a second opinion. I went back to my otolaryngologist, told him this information. He also gave me the name of it. I didn't like the bedside manner of this one particular doctor. Plus, he was a neuro-ophthalmologist. I said, do I need a neurosurgeon? Do I need to have this out? He said not to worry about it. It was all brand new. I didn't understand anything about this. I didn't know you could live with a brain tumor. I didn't know, you imagine something dramatic, like you have to be rushed to the hospital and have immediate surgery. And so after two more opinions, and one with a neurosurgeon, he reiterated no. And then I started hearing things like, it's the best kind of tumor and it's in a really good place. And so we're going to leave it. And I kept saying, well, now my personality is I can get very anxious. And I said, okay, so I can travel, I can go overseas, I don't have to worry about a seizure. I mean, we have all these questions from the internet. No. And everyone said, no, just leave it. And we would never, we never do brain surgery if we can leave it there. And so for you, we just are going to monitor it with MRIs. And then I had the neurosurgeon, that particular neurosurgeon said, hopefully you'll die of something else, not of that. You'll die with your brain tumor, not of it. I felt happy, but in a way I felt kind of all by myself. I didn't know, I was like, all right, so that's fine. And then you worry, and then you minimize it, and then you occasionally open up and tell people, and then they say, oh, so it's not really a brain tumor. I said, I don't know what it is. And, so that continued for about 3 years. I was on active surveillance. And so I was, had a lot of anxiety.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things people don't really realize too. I mean, in the grand scheme of things, brain cancer physically isn't really that hard. I mean, there's some issues. You get the weird twitches and tremors, and me, I have balance issues. But in terms of day-to-day pain, it's just really just fatigue. But psychologically, it's probably one of the toughest, just because there is so little. People have a misconception. They think, oh, brain cancer, you must be on death's door, and you're not. But it's just so invisible that, and then for you personally going through as the person who's been diagnosed, it's like all that feeds into your own psychoses. Yourself, I'm a little bit anxious, tend to be anxious, so it's like your mind wants to jump to the worst. It's like,
will I ever have a period of time where I don't have to worry about it? And everything I learned was that they couldn't, every tumor is kind of different, and they could. It might grow a millimeter a year. It might not grow at all for 5 years and then have a growth spurt. It might just remain dormant forever. Nobody could tell me answers to this, so that just kind of fed my uneasiness about it. But eventually, I was also surprised in the medical world that no doctors would follow, nobody followed up. So I was like, gosh, I have this tumor, and if I don't schedule these appointments on my own every year, or in the period of time that they tell me, nobody really cares. I was like, gosh, nobody's like, hey Marissa, we're really worried you have this tumor, how are you doing, should you come in, do you want an appointment? It was like, if I didn't call, if I didn't advocate, then nothing would have happened. Eventually the neurosurgeon said, you know what, you're healthy right now. The tumor my tumor was just growing a millimeter a year. The neurosurgeon said, you know what, it's fine, it hasn't done anything yet, but we're going to just go ahead and take it out because, you're healthy, it hasn't done any damage yet, and I can get to it. And at that point, I went through this whole other process where I was like, oh my, and then I had the panic set in. And he explained it was going to be because of the location, even though it was small. I know that, there's different ways that they can access it. This wasn't going to be a transsphenoidal. But, he explained it was going to be a full craniotomy, and I was kind of in shock at that point. And then that's when, that's all my own journey, and then your family members and your friends' reactions to you, in my case, created a whole nother host of anxieties. And I had people say, "Oh, you decided to have it out." Well, that's good. I said, "Well, I didn't decide to have it out." I was very afraid, also because of the bad emotional situation that I was in, and with my ex-husband, and I was afraid that people would look at me differently. People would say, "Oh, she now has issues. She's crazy. She has brain damage from the surgery." But I had been made to feel like this was such a minimal event that I was almost making it up, that I had almost gone out and requested to have this surgery. This is what the feeling that I got. And also, strangely, about a month or less than that after the craniotomy, to not just get no support, but to have people actively kind of attacking you for being tired, for being, don't you feel better yet? I mean, it was a very strange thing.
You do realize I had brain surgery, right?
I think the psychological uplift of having made it through that surgery and being able to speak and being able to move everything, and just, I've never been so thankful. So I was in such a great place mentally, and you realize what really matters in life. And so I also developed this perspective that that people grow from situations, and people grow from the situation they're in, and to go through something and to be so thankful to have a brain tumor removed, and then later to be told it was a grade 1 tumor and that I didn't need any kind of treatment aside from my recovery or any pain. But I didn't need any actual radiation or anything like that. I mean, I felt like I had grown as a person, and my outlook on life, and why my partner in life wasn't able to do that and didn't see that was strange. I didn't understand why together we weren't able to have a better outlook on life and be more thankful and look at what really matters, and all these cliches, but when you really internalize and live through them, all these things just sat with me, and gradually that brain surgery became such an important moment in my life of strength that I looked back and knew that I was in the wrong situation. I couldn't live like that anymore. I couldn't waste the gift that I had been given. Jumping ahead to my divorce, which was a year after my craniotomy, I filed for divorce. One of the problems with brain tumors also is, so I had filed for divorce and I hadn't worked for quite a while, and I knew from my own situation I wasn't getting any child support, as it turns out. I knew I was going to have to work and maintain my kids and take them under my control, which I did. That's a whole nother long story. But I knew I needed to find a job, and I knew I needed health care. And I hadn't worked for a while, and I had this fear almost that somebody might find out that I had a brain tumor, or during an interview they'd say, "Well, what have you been doing for the last couple of years?" I just was so afraid that the connotation that someone that had brain surgery and someone that had a brain tumor might equal some sort of mental deficit. Not on my part, because I didn't feel that, but that's a stigma. And that's another reason that I like talking about brain tumors and people that have them, because it's an awful thing. People with brain, you don't even know who has a brain tumor, possibly, or things with their brain, because, like you said, it's not visible. So, but it is a stigma, I think. But in that being said,
one of my favorite party tricks is if you're talking to somebody and you're tired of talking to them, you just tell them you have brain cancer, and they suddenly get really quiet and don't know what to say. So,
yeah,
I had a brain tumor. Hey, see you later.
Yes, exactly, and that also impacted my outlook on any sort of mental illness or any sort of anyone and anyone that has treatment for any other psychological or mental illness, and we do the same thing for that. So it creates, I don't know what it is about the brain, but that is what happens. But that being said, I got a job, and I was so scared I wouldn't be able to make it through the day. Gradually, I just kind of shifted my life and got into a routine, and I did it. But I always drew upon that experience of the brain surgery and the recovery as strength. But you know what? That was like a nightmare that I thought, that'll never happen. Like, what if I had to have brain surgery, or what if something happened to me, or what? And guess what? It did happen, and I made it through. Like, I had this sore develop over here, like a cut, and it just kind of, and I was like, that is so weird. And I ignored it for a little while. It didn't heal, and as it turns out, it was it was like a bacterial infection from the inside eating outward through my skull, and then it had started, coming out through my skin. And when they ultimately did a CAT scan and looked inside, it turned out that the bone plate that they had replaced during the first craniotomy was like a piece of Swiss cheese. That's what the neurosurgeon told me. So the second surgery, after they discovered that this hole was being eaten away here from the inside out, what they recommended was to remove the bone plate, all the screws and plates that were in there, just like a tune-up on your car. But I went through it in a completely different way. I was trying to get a career going again after so many years. I felt like the time off was going to, cause me to lose time, and it did. And so I made it through that, the second one. And I'm in a great relationship now with a very, very supportive person. And I didn't even realize the position I was in. Now I understand it because I'm in a great place. I've just had a complete understanding of the better part of going through anything in a good relationship, and why the other cliche about some of the most important things in life is so true.